Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're objectively mapping out a highly critical and, honestly, fundamentally reformist text by the Arab thinker Ali Mohammed Al-Shurafa Al-Hammadi. It's a fascinating article called The Path of Truth, and it takes a really hard, unflinching look at the current state of Islamic discourse. Al-Hammadi makes some sweeping arguments about how the religion has been practiced for centuries, and he proposes a radical return to its roots. Now, whether you agree with his perspective or not, his diagnosis of the Muslim world's current crisis is incredibly thought-provoking. We're going to break down his exact arguments, piece by piece, to really understand his vision for reform.
Okay, let's dive into this. Right off the bat, Al-Hammadi poses a massive, fundamental question that really sets the stage for his entire piece. Have Muslims actually followed the path of truth? He's directly asking the reader to consider whether they've truly followed God's legislation, the Quran, as a roadmap to a good life and ultimate salvation, or, well, if they've lost their way, lured into the dark by human-made assertions, rumors, and destructive narratives. He suggests that many have been led astray by people who have essentially hijacked the faith. It's a bold starting point for sure, and one that demands some serious self-reflection. To understand exactly how he arrives at his conclusion, we'll trace his argument through 5 logical steps. First, abandoning the Quran. Second, the role of interpreters. Third, the contradiction of narratives. Fourth, the prophet's divine mandate. And finally, returning to the truth.
Let's start with Section 1, abandoning the Quran and following narratives.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core problem. Al-Hammadi argues that over the centuries, a catastrophic substitution took place. The pure message of the Quran, which he points out is fundamentally built on mercy, justice, peace, and security, was just pushed aside. In its place, human-generated narratives and traditions, often referred to as hadiths, were elevated. And the result? A reality centered on killing, hatred, societal strife, and division. He argues these traditions literally contradict the divine call for a harmonious life. It's like night and day. To really grasp the severity of his critique, listen to his exact words here. They put the book of God behind their backs, abandoned his Quran, denied it, and replaced it with narrators in the name of hadith. Al-Hammadi doesn't mince words, does he? He argues that exchanging divine revelation for the fallible words of men is the absolute root cause of the current crisis.
Moving on to the cause, Section 2, the role of interpreters in dividing Muslims. Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is exactly who Al-Hammadi holds responsible. He systematically levels 4 heavy charges against historical and modern interpreters. First, dividing the faith into warring factions just for control. Second, using emotional manipulation rather than intellect and logic. Third, false gatekeeping, basically acting as if they literally hold the keys to heaven and hell. And finally, merging their personal identity with the religion, treating any disagreement with them as an attack on Islam itself. And he doesn't just stick to generalities either. The author explicitly names historical figures, like Ibn Taymiyyah and al-Bukhari. He argues that the masses have elevated these men to the status of infallible guardians of Islam. You know, because human nature often seeks the easiest path, people willingly follow those who offer them quick salvation at a cheap price. This ends up elevating these scholars to a point where their words are treated with the same or maybe even greater reverence than the Quran itself. To ground this critique, Al-Hammadi constantly returns to the source text. He uses this specific Quranic verse from chapter Al-An'am, verse 159. Indeed, those who have divided their religion and become sects, you are not of them in anything. Their affair is only to Allah. He uses this to demonstrate that the sectarianism created by these scholars isn't just a historical accident. It's explicitly condemned by the very book they claim to uphold. God warns the prophet that he has absolutely no part in those who splinter the religion into factions. Which brings us to Section 3, the contradiction of narratives with peace. This highlights a massive logical inconsistency. Al-Hammadi asks a profound question that really cuts right to the heart of the matter. How can the prophet of mercy advocate for killing innocents and spreading fear? He expresses absolute disbelief that acts of terror, the displacement of the poor, and the shedding of innocent blood could be attributed to a prophet whose explicit mission was compassion. He argues that attributing such crimes to the prophet is just an absolute fabrication. Furthermore, he contrasts the recruitment tools used by extremists with the actual Quranic reality. On one side, we have the illusions sold by manipulative scholars, promises of a guaranteed paradise, companions like the Hur al-Ain, and this idea that a scholar's intercession can somehow save you regardless of your actual actions. On the other side, Al-Hammadi presents the strict Quranic reality of Judgment Day. It's a place of absolute, unyielding justice, where results cannot be altered by cheating, intercession, or emotional appeals. You're judged by your deeds, not by blindly following a sect leader into violence. Let's look at the alternative in Section 4, the reality of the prophet's divine mandate. So, if the narratives are false, what is the truth? Al-Hammadi anchors his answer in An-Nur, verse 54. And the messenger's duty is only to preach the clear message. Notice how he emphasizes that word. Only. The prophet was sent to deliver the message, not to be a tyrant, not to coerce belief or invent methodologies that supersede God's words. His sole mandate was the clear communication of the divine revelation. That's it. So the crucial point is that this fundamentally redefines the concept of the sunnah for the modern era. According to Al-Hammadi, the true sunnah isn't some massive collection of unverified historical anecdotes that often distract from or even contradict the Quran. No, it's simply the living embodiment of Quranic values, spreading mercy, justice, freedom, and peace. And a massive part of those Quranic values is the absolute freedom of belief. Al-Hammadi highlights this verse from Al-Insan. Indeed, we guided him to the way, be he grateful or be he ungrateful. He uses this to strongly emphasize that God guarantees humanity the absolute freedom of choice. There is zero compulsion in this faith. The prophet's job was to show the way, but it is entirely up to the individual to choose gratitude or ingratitude, and they alone bear the responsibility for that choice on Judgment Day. Finally, the solution. Section 5. Returning to the path of truth. Let's move to how this builds into an actionable plan. Having deconstructed the false narratives, Al-Hammadi offers a highly practical roadmap to reclaim the religion. First, actively sweep away the rubble of fabricated narratives that have buried the Quranic verses. Second, return exclusively to the clear Book of God as the sole guide. Third, adopt Quranic legislation to build a secure, good life in this world. Fourth, actively promote cooperation, kind words, and the spread of peace among all people. And finally, definitively reject any texts or traditions that incite violence, hatred, or human rights violations. He summarizes this vision for a renewed Islamic outreach with one final, beautifully powerful verse from chapter An-Nahl. Invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good instruction, and argue with them in a way that is best. This is the ultimate standard for how the faith should be shared. It must be based on persuasion, logic, beautiful preaching, and kindness, never on terror, coercion, or the sword. Which leaves us with the central, provocative question derived from Al-Hammadi's entire thesis. Will Muslims take up this challenge? Will they return to the pure light of the Quran as their sole guide, or will they choose to remain in the darkness of human-made narratives? It is a stark choice between reclaiming a religion of peace and justice or continuing down a path of sectarian division. It's a fascinating argument that challenges centuries of tradition, and it certainly leaves us with a lot to think about regarding how texts are interpreted, and honestly, who holds the power to do so. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the information in front of you.
مؤسسة رسالة السلام العالمية، رسالة إنسانية لعالم أكثر سلاماً.